Welcome to Autism Knows No Borders, a podcast where people connected to autism inspire change and build community. Together with the Global Autism Project, I'm your host, Rachel Harmon, a professional with over a decade of experience in the field of autism services, outreach, and advocacy. Are you or anyone you know either oversensitive or undersensitive to specific sights, sounds, smells, or textures? While this can sometimes be an asset, it can also cause distress or discomfort. If you're familiar with difficulties in processing everyday sensory information, stick around because today's episode is a roundtable discussion where we talk about sensory challenges, featuring autistic self-advocates Hattie Angelise Fox, Amy Smith, and Adrian Sanchez, as well as fellow members of our online Global Autism Community, Cheryl Albright, TJ Laram, and Danielle Terrell. Among other things, we discuss human sensory systems and needs, hyper and hypo-sensitivities, levels of burnout and how to recover from it, regulatory strategies for various environments and situations, teaching children how to cope and ask for help, examining someone's overall health to support their sensory issues, the importance of collaborating with specialists when writing treatment plans, speech processing and interpreting, and supports across the lifetime. In this episode, discover what's possible when you're prepared for the environment. And now I present you the Global Autism Community.
My name is Cheryl Albright. I'm an occupational therapist and yoga therapist, autism sibling, and Skill Core alumni.
Hi, I'm Angelise Fox. I'm stateside in New York. I'm a BCBA special educator, early childhood specialist, and an autistic adult.
I'm TJ Laram, BCBA regional clinical director for Total Care ABA, PhD candidate for PhD in behavior analysis at Simmons right now, and a Skill Core alum from Rwanda in 22 and India in 23. And I'm excited to go to Peru here next week.
Hello, my name is Adrian Sanchez. I am from North Carolina, and I am an IT specialist on the autism spectrum, as well as an aspiring graphic artist. And I'm here to listen to everyone's opinions, and I'm glad to study human behavior during my spare time as well.
Hi, everyone. I'm Amy. I am late diagnosed as in this year, so I'm kind of new to the community, but I started my career as an attorney and then switched to medical training, which is what I wanted to do originally. So I'm now a resident physician. I'm a mom of a 3-year-old and just really happy to have found such a great community with everyone.
Okay, so let's start with defining the different sensory systems and needs. For example, does someone want to explain the difference between hyper and hyposensitivities and what that might look like?
I think the OT can answer that. So think of Goldilocks, right? You have it's too little, it's too much, and just right. And so the hypo would be not enough, and the hyper would be too much. And so it's just the way your brain processes sensory information that comes in. Most of the nerves that go up to the brain are actually from the neck down. It's like 70% of their afferent is what they call them. So they're coming from the body systems and going to the brain, whereas 30% go from the brain and go down. And so when those two systems don't communicate well with one another, that's when we have a breakdown and what they call a sensory processing disorder. So you either don't feel anything at all. So that could be anything: interoception, pain, hunger, thirst, touch. It could be any of your sensory systems. And hyper or too much could be your auditory sensitivities, your tactile defensiveness, and things like that.
Got it. Thanks, Cheryl. Anyone want to add anything?
I agree with everything she said. One interesting thing about sensitivities is that it can be situationally dependent. So, for instance, I know there's, myself included, but there's some autistic people who will have aversion to loud noises, but may also enjoy, for instance, their favorite music played really loud, and that it can kind of depend. And that that can be confusing for people, but I kind of, I guess, intuitively understand that because I'm the exact same way. If it's, I don't like balloons because they can pop and be loud, but I love listening to loud rock music. So yeah, just something interesting.
Yeah. And Angelise, you're nodding your head. You agree?
I definitely agree. Not only can it be situational, it can also be related to fatigue level or rest or restoration or temporal, hormonal, and it extends beyond the five senses that there's also proprioceptive and vestibular systems. So you can have a sensitivity being hyper in one area and hypo in another area simultaneously, which creates a lot of complexities and can be very difficult to A, articulate, and B, understand if you don't experience it.
I'm happy you brought up that more than one sense. I think the five that we're always so accustomed to relying on or just referring to a lot of low hanging fruit because they're just so immediate and just easier to explain. Whereas you like brought up proprioception, interoception, and like even balance. I think the jury's out on the number of senses we have. And so to think about like just the vastness of how we can even receive stimuli and to what degree and intensity really lends itself to just the, I guess, kind of putting a pin on this. I think it's just certainly case by case. Everyone experiences everything differently, and it makes sense with that many variables.
Yeah, absolutely. And when there's that moment of dysregulation, there's also like kind of a range of the dysregulation, right? There's maybe just a little bit and then all the way to that level of burnout. Can someone talk about that and what that might look like when you get to that burnout phase?
I think that burnout needs to be contextualized. I can be intolerant of one sense, but fine with a lot of others. So I remember when my children were very young, I would experience being touched out. I extended breastfed, and there would be times where I just could not tolerate any more touch. But all of my other senses were within bounds of regulation. However, that just tapping on my shoulder was enough to really cause a very mismatched response from the external perspective. And then there can be full sensory burnout where it's literally almost an intoleration or a craving of all of the experiences. I tend to try to say I live at a 10. I'm either at a -10 or a +10, but all of my senses seem to be at 10s. And it's just a matter of, can I manage what's coming in any given moment?
Yeah, thanks for sharing. Adrian, I'd love to hear from you. What's your experience with any sensory dysregulation?
When it comes to actually being overwhelmed with a lot of senses, maybe noisy environments and being touched too much, you definitely want to refrain away from it. But if you're like me in a calm, low key, and maybe Zen like environment, you'll get up to a point where you feel like you want to have more interactions, and then you decide to walk away from that burnout. An energy level pretty much tends to slow down the more you're just feel isolated and you just feel like you just want to have some more interaction with certain people. So in order to raise that level up, you would need to find a place that has what you're looking for, that you want to crave, more of that noise, as well as some more social interaction. And as for that, you pretty much need to go outside the comfort zone. I know a lot of people during 2020 were experiencing that sort of isolation before, and it got up to a point where they wanted to have some more social interactions because staying at home too much was just too much, especially for anyone hypersensitive, and they just felt like they needed to get their opinions. So pretty much in a way, if you want to let off some steam, it's important to just socialize and pretty much get your opinions. Maybe from texting, maybe from posting, maybe just write it down in a journal. That's pretty much one key way that a lot of people can pretty much try to relieve that energy in order to relieve from burnout as well. It's pretty good, and it's a good way to let off steam, especially if you're using it in a form of art and expressing what you want to see as well. It's your own fantasy. You get to control it, and it's a good way to just let everyone see your vision, and you pretty much feel relieved from all that. That's how I can describe it.
Yeah, I love that. Thanks, Adrian.
For Adrian, it's just a question as to whether or not we have similar experiences. Sometimes when I'm in a noisy, busy, fast place, it almost drives the energetic expulsion for me. I can be really social, really gregarious, really playful, really engaged. And it's not until I actually leave that space that I realize that I pushed past my own limits, that, maybe I was on my feet too much, or a hyperverbal, or over social, or any of the ways in which I can feel depleted. And I was just wondering if you have a similar experience, or any of the autistics here as well.
I definitely have. I mean, if it's like from a 0 to 100, you're definitely ripping off the Band-Aid a little too fast. And the best thing to do is to just take baby steps. And you just want to go through low volume plays to a pretty much high volume place. And I would recommend that the best place to go for that is maybe the library. Everyone is required to be quiet because everyone is pretty much trying to study. But at the same time, you can still hear the talking noises. And then from then on, you can just take your way up from there and just go out to where the traffic is. It's not always going to be noisy, and it's not always going to be quiet either, but it might be somewhere in between depending on how busy it is. Is that the answer that you're looking for? That's pretty much similar to that?
I mean, yeah, it definitely tracks. It can be too much, and it also can be things that I desire. When you say like things you crave, right? If I'm craving more social attention or social engagement, maybe I go out with a friend and I have kids, they have kids, maybe someone else is there, and it's all of a sudden way more than I expected, and I'm fine. I feel fine in the space, but when I leave, I'm like, ooh, I did too much. I was there too long. I didn't give myself enough breaks. I didn't pace myself properly. And it can be really hard to know that.
How do you deal with it afterwards?
That can depend on time of day and what's available. So, if it's later in the evening, my kids are going to go down, and I unfortunately might stay up a little bit to kind of give myself this period of time that feels settling and quieting. It might be stating some other need, bringing something else up, like eating too many sugary things. I mean, it's a wide variety. It can be engaging in self-stimulatory behavior. It can be connecting with my partner. It can be a lot of ways to just try to take something that was over exhausted and bring it more in alignment with the rest of my entire system. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it can be soothing things. It could be going in the hot tub or taking a bath or listening to a preferred music or reading or a podcast as well. Like I can try to bring everything down. It's so situational. It's hard to say like overall, what's the answer?
Right. Yeah. Cheryl, from your experience, what are some strategies that you've found to be helpful for your clients?
So like I said in my intro, I'm also a yoga therapist. So a lot of what I do comes through that yogic lens and not just what people think of as the physical postures. It could be meditation. It could be mantra, repetition. So singing, different forms of meditation or deep relaxation. It could be the physical postures if that's what people need. It could be positive affirmations. For every single nervous system is completely different. And like it said before, it's situational. So I like to create things called wellness plans. And actually, like Anjali said, from 0 to 10, how am I feeling right now? And what do I need to do in this moment to make myself regulated or to at least come down? And it can be used, it doesn't just have to be the autism spectrum. It can be other forms of neurodiversity and mental illness. And I've had a lot of success. I use the FACES scale, the pediatric pain scale. So my colleagues would use things like zones of regulation and some other, and I don't like them because I'm blue. Well, no, that doesn't really work. But 0 to 10, there's faces that match it. So if you're at a point where you can no longer use your words, you can point. You can tell me where you are. If you don't use words for your language, you can point, or you can say a number, or we can go from there. And so I've had a lot of success. So like from 0 to 2, what does that look like to a person who doesn't know you? And then, how do we stay in that, 0 to 2? Is that possible? And if it's not, what do we need to do? And I just break it down by numbers. We all have meltdowns. Life becomes overwhelming and we will all have those 10s. And yogic lens, we can reflect back on it and go, okay, so if this situation happens again, what are my choices? What can I do differently next time? And we're not going to prevent all meltdowns because we're all human. And we begin to learn what things help us, what situations maybe we'd like to avoid in the future. If they're not avoidable, what can we do to prepare? And just have a plan. And that's why I like to call them wellness plans, because then we just have a plan for future.
Yeah, I like that too. Amy, do you have anything to share about some strategies that have helped you?
I think just knowing yourself pretty well, learning to pay attention to the things that don't agree with you and the things that kind of build you up. So doing more of the things that build you up. So like me, I said earlier, I like to listen to rock music, and swaying sometimes helps, like just standing still and kind of swaying while I'm listening to music. And then definitely just avoiding things or adapting things that don't work well for you. So instead of making plans ahead of time, I've kind of learned to do more last minute plans, because it'll be much truer to what I'm feeling up for at the moment. I think that that's been a big help, and learning to pay attention to yourself is difficult for us with, I guess, interoception issues. But I think the more that I learn about autism, the better I'm able to kind of accommodate myself and make those adjustments.
Yes, absolutely. And, when talking about like looking for these triggers, right, they can be different in different environments. Maybe in a public space, it might look different from at work or at home. So, could you guys share what some of those specific triggers might be? Things that you'll know, okay, here's a time that I can pull out something from my tool belt. Yep, go ahead.
If it's okay, Rachel, I'd like to back up and kind of piggyback on Cheryl's and speak more from the clinical side.
Go ahead.
I love the concept of wellness plans, and one of my favorite approaches, behavior analytically, was developed by Rosalie Prendergast, who is out in Denver, Colorado. She conceptualized the happy medium approach, and it really looks at shaping behaviors and uses a lot of language to mitigate those things, helping people to kind of come into a better sense of interoception, identifying spaces that are noisy, busy, fast, versus someplace that's slow, calm, and quiet, and then intentionally selecting for them. And as well, she does not care for zones of regulation, and nor do I personally, but she creates a noticing grid for each learner. And it's a very specific one page for those of us who are BCBAs or clinicians support plan. It talks about, and the learner can choose, they want, red, yellow, green, they want good, not good, whatever. Like they can label those different spaces for themselves. What does it look like from the outside? What might someone else see? What are you feeling to the best of your ability to create that description for someone else? What strategies do you like to engage in to help regulate yourself? And what strategies can someone else engage in to help regulate you? And so the goal overall, when she's designing treatment plans, insurance-based treatment plans, is to bring somebody to a just right and matching. Everyone's not supposed to be slow, calm, and quiet. If you're playing in a gym, you should be noisy, busy, and fast, But again, if you're in a library, it is a slow, calm, and quiet space. Understanding that no one knows what you think inside your head unless you express it some way. Sometimes that's hard for some people to conceptualize, and helping them bridge that gap can help reduce and improve coping skills. And so clinically, I personally really like using the noticing grid and a lot of the pieces from the happy medium approach for some of my vocal, verbal, or at least verbal communicators, because I can help them start to piece out those things, as well as for myself and for my kids. I find myself regularly saying, like, I didn't know you were thinking that in your head. I need you to tell me out loud, and then I can be a better help. You're right and I'm right. It's not a one or the other. So kind of these balanced language approaches that kind of help. It's not one way or the other, just understanding that there is sort of a messy middle in life. I think that's a super important tool that I've brought to my clinical approaches with all of the different individuals I work with across age and neurotype, that I found really beneficial.
Yeah, especially like that part of how can other people around you help the situation. Sometimes people just don't know what to do if they see someone struggling or having a hard time and they want to be of help, but they also don't want to make it worse. So, yeah. TJ, you had your hand up?
I am thankful the clinical side was brandished there because it kind of opens up any contributions I can really make in this vein. But one assessment that I like to use a lot, behavioral health index, examines health repertoires much beyond your typical behavioral analytic frame, is where you're a lot of times looking at like discrete units of behavior. So the three items that I stress a lot and I think aren't always and I know most good company here will probably be like, well, those are things we need to focus on. But I find, by practice and supervision, that it's not as common as I'd like it, but focusing on like feeding, sleeping, and exercise. I even like it too, where something I recommend as in plans, while we're talking about wellness or support plans or even behavior intervention plans, like antecedent exercise. Now, it's not contingent exercise, which would be, that's mean. We don't do that. But hey, this kid, 5 years old, loves to run. And all these sessions look a little sedentary. And so how can we program, again, those health repertoires? And then I'm curious, though, because I don't have much experience with any sensory concerns, but if there are like bouts where, let's just say, like general physical and mental health are well tended to, is it like kind of easier to approach some of those environments where sensory concerns may exist? Because I'm kind of leaning on that when I work with these kiddos too. It's like I'm teaching these health repertoires that have kind of more of a proactive approach to just about anything in many ways. But I'm seeing some nodding with Angeli, so I'm just glad I'm on the right track. I just wanted to kind of throw that in there when we talk about clinical, because it's like sometimes, again, just look at the overall health and how can you improve that and see what that then does to any concerns that occur in life. Not to say it's a one size fits all, never making that assertion, but yeah, sometimes just diet and exercise, right?
Well, and there's also fight, flight, freeze. And so like when you get in that freeze or stuck state, like if you follow any of the work from Brett Frank, it's like you just got to move, right? Like you just have to fit, like whether it's take a step and go into a different room versus like a full out exercise program, right? Like it might even have to be like baby steps to get there. And where sensory processing comes in all this, it's kind of the chicken and the egg. So is it the inability to screen input and do something meaningful with it that then causes fight or flight, or is fight or flight kicked on and now you can't process sensory information the way that you're supposed to? Nobody really knows. It's probably a combination of both. And so, like you said, if you're not eating, sleeping, and digesting, we need to start there, because there's something, the brain and the body are not communicating with one another, and you're going to have sensory issues to start. So this is where we get our picky eaters and the kids that are chronically constipated and have IBS, or adults, reflux symptoms, poor breathing patterns. I could keep going. We don't sleep. That needs to be tackled first. Because think about like when we don't get a good night's sleep, what do? We reach for caffeine, carbs. We're kind of cranky. Noises bother us. We don't want people near us. Guess what? Our folks are no different. Their nervous systems, it's the same thing. Like we don't want any of that. And so we just need to remember, coffee all day. I know. This machine runs on caffeine. So, especially right now with like 2 hours of sleep Anyway, so sleep is usually my first one to tackle. If we're not sleeping, I send people back to their doctors and ask for a sleep study.
Hello, Rachel here. Would you like to share your own perspectives by participating in roundtables like this one? Join our online Global Autism Community, a safe and judgment-free space where all kinds of people connected to autism regularly discuss important topics like autistic identity, dating on the spectrum, coping strategies, and many, many more. We'd love to see you over at community.globalautismproject.org. And now, back to the roundtable.
I think it's super important that you talk about that piece of the brain too, right? Like neuroscience is such a new field, even though it's behavior analysis where the babies in psychology, like neuroscience is really emergent. fMRI studies are coming out at much more rapid rates. The technology is more affordable. And you're seeing so many things that people spoke about and attempted to articulate now being evidenced scientifically. You know, that 2 to 4 year prefrontal cortex delay that occurs for many ADHDers and autistics. The fact that we only have 11 years worth of data where, in at least the state side, you're allowed to dual diagnose autism and ADHD. The fact that you're starting to see that, you know, we know that the human brain, my background's also development, so development and child psychology, but that the human brain is created much smaller than what it is when you're at adulthood, and there's multiple stages of neural pruning that don't effectively occur or over occur, under occur in certain presentations of autism, and we're able to start mapping that now. And so, you know, it's very interesting that these experiences that people spoke to and were dismissed are really being evidenced scientifically. Like you said, that 30% is coming from the brain down, but most of the nervous system is coming from the brain up, and the brain is still at the control center of the nervous system. And so when you have a brain that is physiologically made differently, your prefrontal cortex is smaller or 2 to 4 years delayed. Well, that's why you start seeing those social immaturities, and that people recognize autism in somebody and just think that they're weird and don't know why. They couldn't tell you why, but that person's just weird. It's that 2 to 4 year delay. It's the fact that even in adulthood, it's not as complexly developed as the neuromajority. You know, it's an excessive amount of gray matter that allows us to think at really rapid paces that make it hard for us to sometimes get our words out, or can create an overburdened sensory experience. And starting to see those things come out across multiple replicated studies, but it's not in behavioral science, it's in neuroscience. And so unless you're crossing over into other validated research bodies, you're not seeing that evidence.
Are we seeing some collaboration across disciplines where maybe some people without experience might seek support and consultation?
A little bit. I know that there is a podcast done by a neuroscientist and a neuropsychologist out of Australia. It's a neurodivergent female podcast. So they're starting to pull that stuff together. Temple Grandin's book, My Autistic Brain, looked at fMRI studies across multiple different presentations of autism and people who were willing to submit. So you had for themselves for studies, you have people who were communicating through text or typing. You have Dr. Grandin, you had people who were non-vocal verbal, and you were starting to see certain presentations of their neurostructures being actually differentiated. There's some postmortem studies that I saw in the developmental psychology literature when I was getting my initial certifications. So you're seeing some collaboration, but everyone's still in their own boxes. You know, even the fact that ACT grew out of behavioral science, it's still very much dominated by psychology, and it really is not moving through the behavior analytic field in the way that I think it should. So yes and no, I think is the answer.
Yeah. Got it. Danielle?
Before you asked that, I was just about to say, and this is why it's so important to have an integration of studies and services, and to really be looking at the person as a person and what are their needs and how can we support them from like a provider perspective. Like I've seen someone having a meltdown and engaging in self-injurious behavior where like outsiders will just look and like judge him for like, why is he doing that? Like, you know, why can't he control his body? And they'll just make all these assumptions or just trying to race to a conclusion without really assessing, you know, is it because he's having a sensory overload? Like, you know, does he need to go outside? Does he need movement? Is he really getting that individualized support that he needs to be successful in an environment where he can feel safe and be successful and happy?
Yeah.
I can give an example with my brother, especially most recently. So we transitioned him into a different house, and he is doing much better there because his sensory needs are being met. He is one that needs a high level of movement in order to stay regulated. His anxiety shows He'll find a string on his shirt, and the next thing you know, he doesn't have a shirt on. And so it's an anxious thing. It's like somebody who smokes, right? It's half sensory, it's half, I try to explain it to them. I said, it's not, he needs to keep his hands busy. That doesn't work. That is just the way he releases it. And so he feels safe. That is number one, right? He feels safe. He's sleeping. We just had a GI appointment. Like they're all, all of the things. And the staff are like, he smiles so much more now. Well, like, yes, he can't tell you that he feels better, but you can see it in his physical posture. You can see it in his sleep patterns. You can see it in his digestion patterns. You can see it in other ways other than him saying, I feel better.
And for some people, you have to look at those other ways because they're not able to say, I feel better. And that's where we need to bring more attention to the profound autism population and how can we support everyone.
It's one of the reasons I love that noticing grid I was referencing is it talks about what does it look like when you are just right in matching or able to be just right in matching? What does it appear like from the outside? So it's not reliant on necessarily a vocal verbal communication of like, hey, I'm better now. Thanks so much. The person, their caregivers, their all interest holders can help describe what does it look like for this person when they're regulated? And what does it look like for this person when they might be becoming dysregulated? And what does it look like for this person when they are way outside of their normative and really not able to handle the environment? And that's one specific column. And then another one is like, what does that person like to do to get back to regulated? And what can people around them do to help support that? And so, it's something that someone could literally walk around with in their pocket if you are someone who can lose your words and just hand it over and point to like, please do this. Or a family could post so that all caregivers can match and clinicians can match. Treatment plans can be so complex and they need to be, but they also need to be accessible or they don't get followed.
We see that a lot with kids, right? In treatment plans that teachers have it, other service providers are aware of the needs. How about for adults in the workplace? Is this something that we're seeing or that of other autistic adults doing, like disclosing to their employer specifically about their sensory challenges? And are people more open to that?
Personally, I don't often disclose because there's still a lot of infantilization. My brain is broken and I'm not normal and I have to be handled with kid gloves and just give her way and appeasement as opposed to collaboration and a sense of belonging tends to be more my experience. However, I do have some peers that I know have disclosed and workplaces that have accommodated, whether it's more flexible caseloads or a lower caseload. Again, the Neurodivergent Women's podcast in Australia, the autistic technician says that her government structure actually allows for her to receive disability and work as much as she can. And it's a constant thing that they work on together. So it's really nice to see that there's a modern governmental structure that's really supportive. And then I've also know of a peer up in Boston who disclosed to a PhD, so she's a doctorate in behavior analysis, educator, disclosed to her bosses, and they said, we accommodate children, not adults.
That is really sad. Adrian, do you have something to share?
Yeah, I definitely agree on that statement. And for some people who are self-conscious with disclosing about their neurodivergent nature, masking tends to be able to take place because they want to prove themselves that they can be able to do everything. And this would also coincide with speech recognition and how much of the words that they can be able to process all at once in order to make it come out a certain way. And certain times in work environments, I noticed that there can be a lot of stuff that can be pretty much new for even adults to handle, like understanding idioms and sarcasm, or just playing around and just with what you're telling coworkers, even though you're not being serious among others who are just not accustomed, because in the neurodivergent community, sometimes it can be just taken literally. In order for that to be handled delicately, it's important to understand those accommodations with people on the spectrum. And understanding conversations with background noise is also a key factor, especially when out in clubs or when there's too much people in the office that you just need to be able to be in a nice, quiet environment in order to handle a phone call. And that's another accommodation that could be able to take place. And another thing with speech recognition that I can talk about is understanding plots in movies. There's certain times when some people just can't understand what's going on if there's too much conversation going at a rapid pace. And oftentimes, some people can be just lost with what happened and what's going on. There is some key things that I've done to be able to fix all that. One part is like when talking about movies or just trying to understand it better, I find it better to try to read up on it and read every single moment of the plot in order to understand it better, like a storybook, because it's actually being read at your own pace. And I can also say that I don't understand everything if it's happening too fast, but I can tell you that I am able to understand everything visually. I rely on my imagination in order to understand things better. And it's also the kind of thing that's involved with stimming, because oftentimes when I would stim, especially if I'm in a place where I'm not self-conscious to do it, it's basically because I'm using my imagination to be somewhere else, and that pretty much helps put me in my happy place. And I'm sure it's the same thing with everyone else on the spectrum as well. And with speech recognition, that's pretty much the main thing, because it all depends on how fast all the information is getting thrown at you at once in order to interpret it at your own slow pace. Is that pretty much a common thing for lots of other people here? If there's too much speech that's being processed too much all at once for anyone to decipher, if it's too fast?
I can experience that in burnout, but I actually don't think in pictures at all. It's really hard for me to use imagery. That's actually what I struggle with more. I think very much in words and connect words really fast. But when I'm experiencing a more global burnout, someone can be standing right next to me and I can struggle to process what they said. I can recall the intonation or the pattern of sounds, but I can't process it into words. I find it really frustrating overall, but even more so because words are almost my dependent communicative strategy. I don't have that imagery. I don't visualize things. I don't have the ability to see things sort of three-dimensionally, like some of my friends can describe that they experience, or that, they can almost perspective take in a visual space in their mind. I can't do that. So when I lose the ability to understand spoken language, I can melt down really fast.
Oh, well, if you understand a lot of spoken language, then it pretty much comes in handy, especially when you're trying to interpret another language as well. As for me, I pretty much find that hard, because in order for it to translate better, I would need to visualize it, specifically with like a word that just sounds similar in a different language, and I just picture that kind of thing that comes with it. Are you able to understand another language if you did it like that?
So I understand a little bit of ASL. Actually, I homeschool my kids, and that's the second language in my house, very much because both of my children can lose access to their vocal verbal behaviors when they're stressed. So sign is a really great backup for our family. Similar to what you're saying, background noise. My son is diagnosed with a central auditory processing disorder. So background noise is really hard for him. So having a backup of ASL is super supportive. And then my father's family was born in Puerto Rico. So I also have a good amount of Spanish in my repertoire. And I can typically, even though I don't understand other languages, I can almost always hear where the words are, where like other people will say that a language they don't speak sounds almost nonsensical to them, that there's almost no meaning in it. And it's very easy for me to usually hear where the word breaks are, or where like the patterns are. So I like know 10 words in a bunch of different languages just from exposure.
Oh, yeah, that does sound relatable, especially since I got family in Puerto Rico. And it's one thing that motivates me to learn a little Spanish each time, but only if it's spoken very clearly and at a slow pace, so I can be able to decipher everything good. And it comes in handy, especially when I'm reading it too.
Peruvians are excellent at speaking clearly in my experience.
I've learned that from just communicating with them, planning this summit we have coming up. I'm like, this is great. They speak so, yes, very clearly. They articulate their pronunciation. Amy, I'd love to loop you into this conversation. Do you have any experience with speech processing in either direction?
Yes, I was going to say something interesting that I learned recently from work. So I'm not in speech therapy, but through my job, I work side by side with some speech language therapists. And something interesting I was describing to them, they said was actually like a memory tool that I guess have been employing without realizing it. But kind of like everyone was saying, when there's a lot of talking going on, or if there's multiple things happening that I'm trying to juggle, for instance, if there's someone tells me something and I'm in the middle of a task but about to finish, I can hear what that sentence was that they just said that I'm going to need to act on or respond to. And I'll play it over and over in my head while I'm finishing up the other task, but I'm not processing it, but I'm hearing it kind of like in their voice and just on like a broken record, just for me to keep it in my head long enough that I can finish the task. And then as soon as I'm finished, then I'll start processing the words of that sentence. And so that was kind of interesting. Like when I told them, when we were just chatting and I mentioned that was something that I did, they said, oh yeah, that's like a memory tool or something. But yeah, you learn to accommodate yourself with those kinds of things without realizing it or knowing why you do it. But it feels like a juggling act when that's going on and you're not really processing anything else that's happening in your environment right then, because we can't multitask. No one really can, but autistic people especially can't. Or a lot of autistic people have difficulty with that, I'll say. And it just helps you kind of get through the situation. It's difficult though. It would take something very jarring to kind of break your focus in that moment, because everything else is just like white noise, because there's nothing else that you can process at that time.
Oh, that's really interesting. I'd never heard of that before. It's kind of like
Surprising
your
you
brain
say that
hacking.
to me, because that's how my brain works too. But I've always used it like it's part of my academic success. I can tune out everything else that might be discomforting about an environment. The lights might be super bright and I might not have slept well and I have no idea the last time I hydrated, and none of it can matter. I can just keep information on a loop. And so like when I would note take in class throughout all of my courses, the ability to just hold vocal verbal information until I could transcribe it was pretty much the dominant way I learned things. Like through my post-grad work, I would not read textbooks because I could just hold that vocal verbal information in mind and I could almost recall it in the sound of the person's voice when I needed to.
Wow, that's impressive. So, wrapping up the conversation here, we have just a few minutes. I'd like to close with talking about different supports when looking at a person across the lifespan, right? From childhood all the way to adulthood. What are some supports that can adapt with that person? For example, Angelise, you said in the chat, you are knitting. Oh, there you go. And this looks like something that isn't distracting to other people around you, but it's still getting your sensory needs met. And so, what are some other things that can support someone across the lifetime?
I would say if you're able to, depending on where you live, reaching out to state agencies or local providers to see if they can provide someone with like a sensory assessment or evaluation. Or maybe this is something that can be done as people are planning to transition outside of school. So when they're in the adult world, they can have access to tools and maybe access to things that they may not have even thought of that they may use or need in the future. So just reaching out, asking questions to see what kind of resources would be available in your community.
Yeah, amazing.
Just piggybacking off of that quick, I know this isn't necessarily a skill that would alleviate it for an individual maybe is struggling with some sensory needs in the moment, but having an advocate, if that is something that would just improve someone's ability to, again, communicate these sensory needs, concerns, what have you. Because I think, again, we're a good company in this remote meeting here, but I think there are a fair amount of people that I've worked with, families that would just expect, well, deal with it kind of thing. And sometimes communicating that, hey, that's not very effective, nor compassionate, nor humanistic, nor insert a fair amount of other attributes here. A way to work with other people. And so just making sure that there's people that are behind you for it. And the advocate doesn't necessarily need to be from an organization, agency, what have you, but just someone that's there to in turn advocate for you in those instances.
That's kind of where I was going to start too. Community, having a wealth of people to draw on. Like, life is so variable. Humans are so variable. Autistic humans are so variable. Sensory systems, we're looking at minimally 7 different integrated human systems. Like, there's so many varieties. And so having a community to dive into and say, like, hey, has anyone experienced this? And what do they do about it? Is one of the things I would definitely say is super important. And then for my son specifically, this is a DMFM system. So this is a microphone that an instructor can wear. And these are earpieces that work basically like hearing aids, but they directly communicate with each other. So when he's in larger group learning situations, either if I'm the instructor or whoever the instructor is, will wear the microphone and transmit directly to his ears. So it decreases the amount of background noise he has to intentionally screen out and helps to decrease the fatigue level of doing it because he's getting more direct contact with the salient auditory information. And so he can focus more on processing what's being transmitted directly into his ears. And I have 2 of them. They just go in, they pair directly to this device, and the microphone is worn around the neck, and it's just, as long as it's at the collar level, it'll pick up enough sound for him to be able to hear really well. And it improves his learning and is something that he can use across lifespan. These are provided right now by his school district, but I probably, as technology moves on, I'll be able to purchase them probably from the school district when they have to upgrade them. So if we just had to stay with this set, that's that. But I'm sure technology will continue to improve, that we have other tools.
So cool.
I know a lot of my deaf autistic friends have a second phone that's literally transcribing information for them. So when we're in multiple situations, they'll put it between us. And as we speak, they're able to read the text while we engage. So I've used it with a couple of friends at like restaurants and things like that. And that's helped them in those environments.
Amazing. Yeah, I'm excited to see where technology takes us. I mean, that's great what you have for your son, but even that I feel like can be on someone's watch, for example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems pretty easy to come in to AAC devices now. Most people have smartphones, and we have a lot of apps that can be able to accommodate those kinds of needs, whether it be ambient sounds or speech recognition apps on there that can use as translators too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
I tend to wear 2 different hats. So the occupational therapist brain says, as we go through adulthood, we need meaningful occupation. And that just means how we're going to occupy our time. So it doesn't have to mean job necessarily. It's just, how are we going to have a meaningful life, and what are we going to do to occupy our time throughout that? Yoga therapy brain says there are lots of tools in my toolbox that you could draw from. And depending on the situation or whatever is coming up for that individual, any of them can be used. And so we know at different points in life, systems change. I think we underlook at female hormone, even in the neurotypical population. And so as I'm creeping into this, I'm like, you know what? We probably could get 90% of our adult females ages 35 to 50 off of psychotropic drugs and just give them a little hormone replacement therapy. But I'm not a doctor, so I can't recommend that. I'm just saying that we could probably get away from all the pharmaceuticals if we actually look at what's going on in the human body. That's a normal human process, right? And so for males, I don't know when the testosterone curve goes down. Maybe the doc can pipe up on this one. And when, like, I can only speak because I'm starting to experience all the fun things. So it started to get me thinking about how many of our individuals have polycystic ovarian syndrome, or how many have hormone dysregulation to begin with, and then we start creeping into perimenopause and menopause. And all of those things lifestyle stuff is what everybody's screaming, right? And so I'm going to, another plug for yoga and all of its limbs. But there's going to be normal human changes as we age, regardless of label, because there are physiological things that happen as the body gets older. And like I said, I don't know what it's like for males, but I'm going to let the doc speak. So our nervous system changes as we age as well.
Yeah, great point to bring up. Amy or Adrian?
I'm pretty sure that there might be some kind of differences that's going to be happening once we age. And for that, I feel like it's pretty good to notice how much we're putting into our body as well. There's a lot of brain foods out there, as well as just performance and exercises that can really help with our testosterone level. And from that, we would be able to accommodate how much of the stress that we have that we can really combat against. And as time goes on, we won't be able to regret anything that we do put into our body, because for that, it's just minimal. And that's pretty much why I resort to making a lot of health smoothies during my spare time, especially when I just need a quick meal. And for that, it gives me a good energy boost. And after that, I'm able to just process things better. And I'm not sure how it is for females. I can't tell you that, but I'm pretty sure that's a lot of common things that's related to the health groups as well.
Yeah, diet is so important, especially the more we learn about the gut biome.
Yeah.
Thanks, Adrian.
Thank you.
I don't have anything to add about the hormones too much. It's kind of not my area, but as you said, they do change as we age. And I think with individualized medicine getting bigger and bigger, I think that will probably be an area that they look into more if they're not already doing it. And yeah, I will definitely echo what everyone said about the importance of diet and exercise. Both of those are huge, and exercise is a great way to get rid of pent up energy. And there's just so many things that people can do. You know, not everyone wants to do a group fitness class. Not everyone wants to run. Some people like doing weights. Some people prefer more like sports centric things, but pretty much helping people find an exercise, even if it's just walking their neighborhood or walking around the park, whatever the person will reliably do is something that they should be encouraged to do. So I think all of those are great suggestions, and it's very important to stay active, especially as we age. So,
yeah. Great. Thank you all for your contributions today. We'll see you in the community. Thanks for tuning in to Autism Knows No Borders. Are you a self-advocate willing to share your story and educate others? Or a professional seeking to hear directly from autistic voices and improve your practice? Or maybe you're a family member hoping to support and empower your loved one. Whatever your connection to autism is, we'd love to hear your takeaways from this episode in our online Global Autism Community, where hundreds of people from all over the world come together to support each other and know that they're not alone. Join us today at community.globalautismproject.org. Let's work together to transform how the world relates to autism. Thanks for listening. Take care.